we can say a few other things about what helps people work through a trauma. And there's some really important things that the listeners can do. Because if telling my story and putting it together helps me to move past the trauma, I need someone who's willing to listen. Because somebody talks if somebody listens. So we need to understand that listening is the first line of support you can give. Now, often people worry about that because they don't know what to do. They don't know whether they're going to damage the person. Now, what we can sort of very simply say that if you give the person who's talking control of the conversation at all times, it should be okay. So you don't take them off into areas that they don't go to. You don't shut them down when they want to speak. And it's helpful not to simply mirror back the same emotions, because what they want is someone whose emotions they don't need to worry about. They're struggling with their own. They want to speak about their own. So what's not helpful is to respond with too much sympathy. Oh my God, that's terrible. I don't know how you got through it. I would never have been able to got through it. You must have been absolutely terrified. All of these sorts of things, which are fine for ordinary experience. But in this case, where we want to create an environment where that person can take hold of their own experience and make sense of it, it's much better to say, what was that like for you? You must have been frightened. Tell me about it. I'm interested. You'd ask that question if they make some reference to how frightening it was. But it's not the emotions as such that's the important thing. It's the experiences that create the emotions. So if I feel terrified, it's the danger. And so encouraging people to speak about the danger can often help them realise that actually it may not have been quite as bad as I thought it was going to be. Because in those moments when something's about to happen, we have a very short-circuit part in our brain which jumps ahead to what you think is going to happen. And many traumas are not about what happened. They're about what I thought was going to happen. And if I thought I was going to die, I've had a life-changing experience, whether it happens or not. And this means that people who had that experience, I call it an anticipatory trauma. I expect something's terrible is going to happen, but it doesn't. They often feel, nothing happened to me, I shouldn't be upset. Look at this person next door who had their house destroyed by a tree and maybe never at any stage felt that it was going to fall on them. They were down one end and the other had they knew where the tree was and they knew it was going to fall over the kitchen and bathroom and lounge room and everything else. But they're up in the bedroom or the other way around. And so they were thinking, oh my God, I'm going to lose my house, but not I'm going to die. Whereas somebody else, sometimes we might make a mistake. It doesn't matter whether it's accurate or realistic or whatever. If I think, oh my God, I'm going to die, I've had a life-changing experience. And that's where it's really helpful to take the person back to what happened and why. And when they say, I thought this was happening, what was actually happening? How big was the tree? Which the way was the wind going? And so on. And help them understand that they made a mistake in their expectations. And we can help them very much then by keeping on working with the facts. And there's something that will routinely happen with people when they actually get to the most dangerous part of the story. And that is they'll tear up. Could be men, could be women, whatever. They'll tear up or they'll stop and they'll be struggling for control. Now this is typically a time where the listener becomes worried. Am I upsetting them? Am I harming them? Am I hurting them? And particularly if they start to cry freely, people get very agitated and think this person is crying, they need to see a counsellor. No, they don't. You don't need to see a counsellor every time you cry. You need to see a counsellor when you can't control it, or when you can't understand it, or it's overwhelming. And this would be something I would look at. When people get upset, is it just showing you the depth of emotion involved? And if that's the case, usually what helps people is for the listener to be calm and interested. Not to get agitated and worried, but to be calm and interested and confident that if they've shared this with you, it makes sense to them to want to share it. And therefore it's really helpful to just listen. And usually we don't have to do anything except sit there and maybe continue talking with them about it. And often when they've crying has subsided and we keep going with the story, when they've settled down and blowed their nose and wiped their eyes, we can say that must have been a very frightening experience for you. Do you think about it a lot, or do you remember why the tree didn't do what you thought it was going to do, and so on. Just any kind of questions to help them put the whole story together. And you'll find that the person will feel, almost invariably, they'll feel much lighter after they've let those emotions out. Because what we know is that the production of emotion shifts the energies. And when we shift the energies, that's reflected in changing the brain processes. It's changing it in our bodies. And that's what helps us to move through. So emotion's a good thing. If a person, now my motto is nothing works for everybody. So we've got to be sensitive. And if a person doesn't want to go there, don't take them there. If they reach a point in the story where they feel too embarrassed that they can't manage their emotions, of course we go with them and change the subject. But if we always remember that if they've changed the subject at a moment where I'm left wondering, you're standing here, you must have survived, but I don't understand why you survived. I used to, when I was working with the Black Summer fires, in one of the communities, a number of people told me the story about a young man who was defending a house. And he went round on the forest side to defend the house. And I'd never met him, but everyone told me his experience was when the fire came out of the forest, it was 3 or 4 times the height of the trees. And he thought, this is completely impossible to fight this. I'm going to die. And I think about 4 or 5 people told me this over a few days when I was in that community. Nobody could tell me why he didn't die. It wasn't in the story. He didn't die because he told the story. That's how they all knew. They all knew what was in his mind because he told them. So he must have survived. But no one could tell me how he survived. It wasn't in the story. And so this is what makes a post-traumatic loop. But maybe it wasn't quite as bad as he thought, or he had enough training to know where to shelter, or he made a good decision, ran round to the other side and let the house burn. Whatever it was, he had the intelligence and the competence to survive. But it's not in the story. Because every time he goes to, I'm going to die, and then says, but I'm going to run around the other side of the house, or, oh my God, it's not quite as hot as I thought, I am going to survive. You know, the whole story goes to this huge emotion and then comes down again to survival. And that's what we want to create, this loop that goes through the story and comes out the other side to where we are now. So my advice really is, if people get upset when their story gets to a certain point, just keep going with it. Just be calm, be interested, show them you care. You might offer them tissues or something, and just keep the story going until you get them out of it, the other side of it. And it'll be enormously helpful. If a person is clear that they want to stop and don't want to talk, well, you respect that. But this is not a counsellor, it's just being interested in the experience of your friends and family members. Another side to the talking is that there are some people who try hard not to talk and not to think about it and shut it down. They're very, very quiet. Now, we should respect that. That's the way they want to do it. But it's often helpful to create opportunities for people to talk if they want to. So people often get very uncertain about what they should say. But I think we can think of some very neutral questions such as, how's it all going? How's your recovery going? And if we know anything about it, or we can just simply ask, have you heard from the insurance yet? Or something like that. And they can simply say no and talk about the football. You know, well, that's all. But they might actually want to talk. And if you have a lot of emotionally charged experience, you're full of it. And talking is a way of releasing the tension. And so there are some people who want to talk over and over and over again. And in fact, anyone who has a huge life experience, I'm sure every one of us has found this, find ourselves talking over and over something, even though we know the other person already knows it, but we're telling them all over again. It shows that there's something very comforting and helpful about telling the story yet again. And so one of the things I say to friends, relatives and so on who are outside the area and who didn't experience the disaster is try to remember that even though it sounds like they're saying the whole story over and over again and becomes quite tedious for someone who's already heard it half a dozen times, that they're actually working out how to process it, how to move through it. And if you listen carefully, you'll find that although 80% of the story is the same, there's a 20% or 10% bit that they haven't said that they've been saying the last few times. They've dropped it off. And there's 10% that's new. Only 10%. But in between there's the 80% that's all the same. But that's showing you where the progress is. And very slowly you'll find that the story will shift. And if we don't listen carefully with interest, we'll think, oh, they're talking about the storm again. They'll never give it up. And then it's tempting to say, look, you should put it behind you, you should concentrate on other things, look at the bright side, and none of this actually meets them. Now, we can't do it all the time, but just try to remember that listening is a profound way of supporting someone. Now, there's a particular circumstance in which this is a real issue, and that is for local businesses, because many business people have told me what a tremendous load it is when they might themselves be affected, and all of the customers coming in and they all want to tell their story. And not only that, tourists coming in and saying, oh my God, were you here for the storm? And they want to hear about the storm for their own curiosity. And so the person who's getting this all day finds this really wearing and tedious. And it's a serious, you could say, emotional stress on people when in fact life is very hard anyway. Now there's a couple of things about this. The first is that if we relate to what I've been saying about talking, it's sometimes a bit comforting for the shop proprietor to think giving 2 or 3 minutes to this person talking is actually creating for them a sense that the local people that they regularly see in the shops and so on are part of a supportive community. And if you are serving someone and they've done the transaction and then they start talking, probably they won't want to talk for a long time. There are probably some individuals that might, but most people just want to say a few sentences. And if you just give them that time, they'll go away thinking that they feel really positively supported. It's just a few sentences. And then you can maybe think about some ready-made words that you can have that can kind of move the conversation on, just tactfully and gently. You can, as they draw breath, you can say, "I'm so glad that you've been able to do that. Let me know how it goes next time you come in. I've got to just do this. I've got to duck out the back." You know, so that you keep moving on. And I've found that when I have had meetings with a group of business people, I remember once being in Halls Gap, a really important tourist town, after a bushfire had occurred, and there was a meeting of the local proprietors, and they were really complaining about how heavy it was. And there were a number of them that actually thought up very good replies and very good things to say. And together they shared so that they all were able to take it on, because I think we can help each other out. Some people will think of these words for this situation, other people have thought of words for that situation. And so I think there's a very valuable thing in business people getting together and sharing their experience and what they've learned to do. So it could be as simple as, I know that in Port Arthur, in the cafe, there's a notice there saying, "Please do not ask the staff about the shooting," from Port Arthur. And that's what they wanted to do. Other people have done similar things in Black Saturday. But if you're just dealing with the local people, the talking is very important. And if you can just have some ways of giving a little signal that you've got a moment, but only a moment. And maybe your body language can be doing that. You can be starting to tidy up something as the conversation's going along, and then you take that moment to say, "Thanks for sharing it with me. I'm really pleased," or "I'm sorry this," or "I hope that." And that's enough to then be able to move on. And I think it's really important for business people to have their own support networks. And if you think that you're giving something to the community, it's perhaps not quite so irritating and frustrating, because you're wanting to do your work and keep getting interrupted. But if you can think to yourself, maybe you're the only one that's hearing this. Maybe there's an isolated person. Always consider, am I the only one that's hearing this? What an important role that is. They've got one outlet. And then the business people can meet together. I think the more they can have opportunities, have a few drinks on Friday night or something, and just swap this experience, because they too need to pour out their experience. And of course, it may be useful sometimes even to get a trained person to have a session, a bit of a debrief session, to help people process things and maybe get some advice on how to handle difficulties with people as well.